Jasmine Crockett's fearless confrontation with Pam Bondi was more than just another political skirmish. It was a moment that defined the essence of integrity and courage in the face of deception. In an era when political discourse is often dominated by rehearsed statements and calculated posturing, Crockett's approach cut through the noise with authenticity and raw determination. She entered the congressional hearing not to score points, but to expose the inconsistencies that Bondi had so carefully woven into her narrative. From the very beginning, Crockett's tone was direct yet composed, embodying the confidence of someone who had done her homework. She didn't rely on theatrics or emotional appeals. Instead, she grounded her arguments in facts, evidence, and an unwavering belief that truth still holds power in the halls of Congress. Her words didn't just question Bondi's claims, they dismantled them piece by piece, leaving little room for ambiguity or denial. As the exchange unfolded, it became evident that Crockett had a clear strategy: to reveal how misinformation thrives when left unchallenged, and how easily it can crumble under scrutiny. She dissected Bondi's statements with surgical precision, asking pointed questions that forced her opponent into uncomfortable territory. Every response from Bondi seemed to tighten the noose of contradiction around her own narrative, while Crockett's calm persistence made it impossible to escape accountability. Observers could sense the tension rising in the room as Bondi struggled to maintain composure, her polished political armor beginning to crack under the weight of undeniable truth. This wasn't a personal attack. It was a necessary exposure of the dishonesty that too often shapes public perception and policy. Crockett's poise demonstrated how preparation, intellect, and fearlessness can silence even the most experienced political defenders when the facts are against them. Throughout the confrontation, Crockett embodied what many citizens wish to see in their representatives: someone who doesn't shy away from difficult truths or powerful adversaries. Her demeanor was both professional and passionate, reflecting a deep commitment to justice rather than self-promotion. She didn't raise her voice or resort to insults. Instead, she let logic and reason speak louder than rhetoric. Each statement she delivered carried weight because it was anchored in verifiable reality. She cited specific examples, referenced official records, and held firm when Bondi tried to deflect responsibility. The balance of power shifted visibly as Crockett maintained control of the narrative, showing that authority is not determined by seniority or political alliances, but by the strength of conviction and the clarity of truth. Pam Bondi, long accustomed to controlling narratives through media appearances and strategic framing, found herself in unfamiliar territory. Crockett's relentless questioning cornered her into admitting inconsistencies she had previously dismissed or denied. The precision of Crockett's inquiry exposed gaps in Bondi's reasoning and highlighted the contradictions between her statements and documented evidence. What was most striking was how Crockett managed to keep the discussion centered on facts rather than emotion, even as the emotional intensity of the moment grew. Her calm yet assertive presence neutralized Bondi's attempts to pivot or distract from the central issue. This dynamic revealed something deeper about leadership. The true measure of a public servant lies in their ability to face scrutiny with honesty, not in their ability to manipulate perception. The symbolism of that moment extended far beyond the congressional chamber. Crockett's actions resonated with a public weary of half-truths and partisan spin. She represented the frustration of millions who feel that accountability has become optional for those in power. By exposing Bondi's inconsistencies, she reminded the nation that truth-telling is not an act of aggression, it is an act of service. Her courage to speak directly, backed by evidence and principle, served as a blueprint for how elected officials should conduct themselves when defending the public interest. She turned what could have been another fleeting political exchange into a defining moment of integrity, one that demanded attention and respect. The confrontation also underscored the evolving role of women in politics, particularly women of color like Jasmine Crockett, who continue to challenge the double standards and dismissive attitudes often directed toward them. Crockett's confidence shattered stereotypes about who gets to hold power and who has the right to speak truth to it. Her sharp intellect and eloquence proved that competence and courage transcend the boundaries of gender and race. The grace with which she handled Bondi's defensiveness revealed not only her skill as a legislator but also her emotional intelligence, a quality that allowed her to stay grounded even as her opponent grew increasingly flustered. Her ability to maintain composure while applying pressure exemplified the strength that comes from conviction rather than arrogance. Observers could feel the emotional undercurrent of the exchange. Bondi's discomfort was palpable as her arguments collapsed under Crockett's scrutiny. The more Crockett pressed for clarity, the clearer it became that Bondi's narrative was built on shaky foundations. What began as a confident defense turned into visible frustration and self-contradiction. Crockett's approach demonstrated how truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, it simply needs to stand firm and refuse to yield to distortion. Every sentence Crockett delivered seemed to echo a larger message: accountability is not optional, and no one is above the truth. In confronting Bondi, she wasn't just exposing one person's falsehoods, she was challenging a broader culture of political evasion that has eroded public trust. Her insistence on transparency reflected a growing demand from the American public for leaders who prioritize honesty over loyalty to party or power. The scene was more than a clash of personalities, it was a symbolic reckoning for a political system that too often rewards deception over integrity. Crockett's composure and command over the discussion turned what could have been a heated argument into a masterclass on the effectiveness of truth when wielded with precision. Even those who disagreed with her politically could not deny the effectiveness of her delivery. Her ability to stay factual, disciplined, and fearless in the face of resistance turned the moment into a viral example of how accountability should function in a democracy. Viewers watched as she exposed the fragility of falsehoods, showing that facts, when properly articulated, can still cut through the fog of political spin. The energy in that room shifted from defense to revelation, from denial to exposure, and from manipulation to truth. Crockett's courage transformed what could have been just another congressional confrontation into a historic moment of transparency and empowerment. Pam Bondi's emotional breakdown during the confrontation with Jasmine Crockett revealed more than just a clash of personalities. It became a mirror reflecting the raw power of truth and the human vulnerability that emerges when deception can no longer be maintained. Throughout her career, Bondi had cultivated an image of confidence and control, a seasoned prosecutor, articulate and composed, known for her ability to navigate controversy with poise. Yet in that moment before Congress, that image began to unravel as Crockett's relentless questioning forced her to confront inconsistencies she could no longer deflect. What the public witnessed wasn't merely frustration, it was the visible collapse of a narrative that had been carefully crafted over years. The calm authority Bondi was known for seemed to falter under the weight of accountability, and emotion began to replace rhetoric as her defense weakened in real time. The moment began subtly, with Bondi attempting to maintain her composure and authority. She delivered her opening remarks with the practiced assurance of someone used to commanding attention in high-pressure environments. But Crockett's line of questioning was not easily dismissed. Her words struck directly at the foundation of Bondi's claims, cutting through the political framing and exposing the contradictions embedded within them. As each question landed, the tension grew more palpable, and Bondi's responses shifted from confident assertions to uneasy justifications. What made the breakdown so striking was that it wasn't born of anger or humiliation alone, it stemmed from the collision between self-image and truth. For years, Bondi had operated in environments where narratives could be managed, where perception could be shaped with skillful messaging and controlled appearances. In Congress, however, there was nowhere to hide. The cameras captured every flicker of discomfort, every pause that lingered too long, every defensive tone that betrayed insecurity. Crockett's calm yet commanding presence amplified the contrast, showing how truth can unmask even the most seasoned public figures. When facts are brought into the light, the illusion of control quickly fades, leaving only the raw emotion of being exposed. Observers could sense that Bondi's reaction wasn't entirely about the confrontation itself but about what it represented. The exchange symbolized a reckoning with accountability that many public figures fear but rarely experience so directly. Her emotional unraveling served as a reminder that beneath the titles, power, and public personas, politicians are still human beings, vulnerable to fear, guilt, and the pressure of public scrutiny. The emotion that surfaced in Bondi's demeanor was not just frustration at being challenged, it was the realization that her credibility was slipping away in front of a national audience. Crockett's precision in presenting facts stripped away the protective layers of rhetoric and forced Bondi to confront a truth that could not be spun. As the exchange intensified, Crockett remained remarkably composed, her tone steady and deliberate. She didn't exploit Bondi's emotional vulnerability for spectacle. Instead, she allowed the facts to do the work. This approach made Bondi's reaction all the more powerful because it was unprovoked by hostility. It was purely the product of internal conflict and self-recognition. Crockett's calm interrogation acted as a mirror, reflecting Bondi's own words back at her and highlighting the contradictions between her statements and the evidence. It was as if every sentence Crockett delivered chipped away at the facade Bondi had constructed, exposing the emotional core beneath the political armor. The breakdown became symbolic of what happens when truth confronts power with patience and precision rather than aggression. The body language of both women told its own story. Crockett sat upright, unwavering, her eyes locked with Bondi's, projecting control without arrogance. Bondi, on the other hand, began to show signs of unease, subtle at first, then increasingly evident. Her hands fidgeted slightly, her tone wavered, and her attempts to pivot to unrelated talking points grew more desperate. When the facts no longer supported her narrative, emotion filled the void. Her voice, once steady and assertive, took on an edge of defensiveness, betraying the strain of trying to hold on to a collapsing argument. To many viewers, this was a moment of vindication, not because they sought to see Bondi embarrassed, but because it demonstrated that truth still has the power to disrupt falsehoods. The emotional breakdown was not just a personal moment for Bondi but a symbolic one for a political culture too often defined by denial and evasion. It reminded the public that the pursuit of truth, though uncomfortable, is essential to the preservation of integrity in governance. Crockett's questioning revealed how facts, when persistently pursued, can break down even the most confident facades. It also illustrated the emotional cost of dishonesty, how maintaining a false narrative requires constant defense until it inevitably collapses under its own weight. In that congressional room, the emotional energy shifted entirely. What began as a routine exchange became a defining moment of exposure. Bondi's discomfort was magnified by the audience's awareness that this wasn't just about politics, it was about truth confronting power in its purest form. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute, as if everyone present understood that something irreversible was happening. Crockett's words, measured and precise, became more than questions, they became instruments of accountability. Each response from Bondi dug the hole deeper, not because she lacked intelligence or experience, but because the foundation of her argument was fundamentally flawed. Bondi's visible emotion, the cracking voice, the defensive tone, the moments of silence, served as a human reminder of what happens when one's public persona collides with reality. It's easy to speak with confidence when surrounded by allies or when one's statements go unchallenged. But under the bright light of truth, the strength of conviction is tested. Crockett's unwavering focus brought out the fragility in Bondi's confidence, demonstrating how emotional breakdowns in politics are not signs of weakness alone but reflections of internal conflict between self-perception and accountability. When truth presses hard enough, even the most confident individuals can falter, not because they lack composure, but because the weight of denial becomes too heavy to sustain. The broader implications of this moment go beyond the two individuals involved. It showcased how truth can pierce through power structures that seem impenetrable, how authenticity can defeat manipulation, and how emotional transparency, even unintentional, can reveal more than carefully crafted statements ever could. The image of Pam Bondi, once composed and confident, struggling to maintain control as Jasmine Crockett calmly presented undeniable evidence, will linger in public memory as a lesson in accountability. It underscored that emotion, when exposed through truth, doesn't weaken the message, it amplifies it by showing the human cost of deception. The congressional clash between Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi served as a powerful reminder of the growing demand for accountability, transparency, and courage in American leadership. In an era where political loyalty often overshadows truth, this confrontation became a vivid example of how integrity can still pierce through the noise of partisanship. Crockett stood as a symbol of a new generation of lawmakers unwilling to tolerate dishonesty, no matter how polished or politically protected it may be. Her direct and fearless questioning of Bondi represented more than a personal challenge, it represented a challenge to the system itself, a system that has too often allowed powerful figures to evade scrutiny under the guise of authority. The moment she began to speak, the tone of the hearing shifted. It wasn't just about exposing inconsistencies, it was about restoring the principle that leadership must be rooted in truth and accountability, not convenience or image. Throughout the exchange, Crockett demonstrated that transparency is not merely an abstract value, but a moral responsibility. Her approach embodied the idea that elected officials owe their constituents honesty, even when it comes at a political cost. Every question she posed carried the weight of public frustration with leaders who manipulate facts to protect their own interests. She reminded everyone watching that accountability isn't an act of hostility, it's an act of service to the people who put their faith in government. Crockett's tone, calm yet unyielding, reflected the strength of conviction that citizens have long desired from their representatives. She did not attack with malice, she confronted with purpose. Her words resonated because they were rooted in evidence and guided by principle rather than partisanship. Pam Bondi's reaction, in contrast, illustrated how fragile leadership becomes when it's built on half-truths. Her defensive posture throughout the hearing revealed how political figures can grow accustomed to operating within echo chambers that protect them from direct challenge. When forced into transparency, the comfort of control disappears, and what remains is the unfiltered truth. Crockett's insistence on clarity left Bondi with little room to maneuver, exposing how hollow political rhetoric sounds when stripped of substance. The confrontation highlighted a fundamental truth about leadership, that real strength lies not in deflecting blame, but in facing scrutiny with honesty and humility. The discomfort on Bondi's face was not just personal, it reflected the discomfort of an entire political culture grappling with accountability long overdue. What made this moment especially powerful was its broader significance in today's political climate. Across the nation, citizens have grown weary of leaders who speak in circles, hide behind committees, or use legal jargon to avoid simple truths. Crockett's exchange with Bondi gave voice to that frustration, turning abstract ideals into visible action. She proved that accountability does not have to be confrontational if it is anchored in fact. The clarity of her words cut through years of public disillusionment, showing that when leaders speak truthfully and hold others to the same standard, trust can begin to be restored. Transparency, in this sense, becomes not just a demand from the people but a duty of those in power. Crockett's composure throughout the confrontation reinforced that duty, a steady reminder that courage in leadership is not measured by how loudly one speaks, but by how consistently one tells the truth even when it's uncomfortable. The clash also illuminated how courage has evolved in modern politics. Gone are the days when political courage was defined solely by dramatic speeches or grand gestures. Today, it is defined by the willingness to stand in uncomfortable spaces and speak truth to power, even at personal or political risk. Crockett's questioning was an act of modern courage, quiet, factual, unrelenting. Her refusal to back down from Bondi's evasion spoke volumes about her integrity. It wasn't about winning a debate, it was about demanding clarity in a system that often rewards ambiguity. The public response to this exchange reflected that hunger for authenticity. People saw in Crockett what they had been missing, a leader unafraid to confront deception head-on without fear of backlash. Her courage reignited faith that honesty still has a place in American governance. The transparency Crockett demonstrated was not only about exposing one person's inconsistencies but about setting a standard for all leaders. By holding Bondi accountable, she established a precedent that truth should not depend on political affiliation or popularity. The hearing became a microcosm of a larger national reckoning, one in which the public demands openness from those who claim to serve them. The symbolism of a woman standing her ground against a seasoned political figure underscored a broader shift in American politics, where integrity is beginning to outshine influence. Crockett's actions reflected an understanding that leadership without transparency is not leadership at all, but performance. Her example showed that courage and truth are inseparable, and that both are necessary to rebuild public confidence in institutions that have long been tainted by corruption and manipulation. Observers noted that Crockett's performance in that hearing room had ripple effects far beyond the walls of Congress. It became a cultural moment, one that sparked conversations about what kind of leadership the nation truly needs. Her unwavering insistence on facts reminded citizens that transparency is not a luxury but a foundation for democracy. Bondi's faltering defense, on the other hand, became a cautionary tale about what happens when political leaders forget that the people they serve are watching and expecting accountability. The stark contrast between the two women, one grounded in evidence and composure, the other defensive and emotional, made the exchange unforgettable. It underscored how leadership is not about titles or credentials, but about moral courage and consistency under pressure. The courage Crockett displayed also represented a broader movement within American politics, one led by individuals who refused to be intimidated by established power structures. Her persistence reflected a generational shift toward leaders who value transparency over tradition and truth over popularity. In a system often criticized for its secrecy, her actions stood as a declaration that the era of unchecked authority must come to an end. Her confrontation with Bondi symbolized that shift perfectly. It wasn't just about exposing lies, but about setting a new bar for honesty and accountability in public service. The hearing reminded viewers that transparency and courage are contagious. When one person demonstrates them boldly, others are inspired to follow. The exchange also illustrated how courage is not loud or aggressive, but disciplined and informed. Crockett didn't need to raise her voice or resort to theatrics to make her point. Her command of facts and calm tone spoke louder than any outburst could. That quiet power, the kind that relies on truth rather than force, is what gave the confrontation its lasting impact. The message was clear. Courage and leadership doesn't come from dominating others, but from standing unwaveringly in defense of truth. It's about prioritizing integrity over optics and the public good over personal gain. Crockett's courage transformed a routine hearing into a defining moment of moral clarity, reminding everyone watching that leadership rooted in truth can still cut through the noise of deception and restore faith in democracy.